There are other potential issues also. LOGMODE table, for example. If you use IST-INCLM without going in and coding a subarea cost name on every entry, then we're going to use the blank subarea cost name for everything. So you literally, if you're going to start using INCLM as your table, you need to make sure it's got a subarea cost name on it. We've already coded the APPN cost name entries on there because they're standard, but there are no subarea cost name entries, so we could not code those on there for you. If you have your own user LOGMODE tables, you've probably already gone in and coded the COS equals operand for all of them. Now you need to go in and make sure that you put in an appropriate APPN-COS operand on each one of them also, so that we can figure out what APPN class of service you want us to use for each of those guys. If you don't, then we assume the subarea cost name is assumed, and you've got an APPN cost name by the same name, which is almost always not true. If neither the subarea cost name or APPN costs are specified, then you get blank for subarea and pound connect for APPN, which may not be the right thing to do either. So we can go into that in quite a bit of detail in both of these books. And the last bullet I'll mention here is APPN to subarea over virtual routes. The APPN subarea cost mapping table. The only time the APPN to subarea cost mapping table is absolutely required is if you're trying to do HPR over virtual routes. So for example, you've got an HPR capable VRTG, or you've got an HPR capable link coming out of an NCP. And so part of the session path is VTAM to the NCP and then out this APPN link, for example. Both of those are APPN sessions going over virtual routes. And they will require, if we're going to do HPR across them, we have to have an APPN class of service associated with the HPR pipe. In fact, we always have an APPN class of service associated with the HPR pipe. That's what they are, right? The problem is we don't know what subarea class of service to use for the subarea portion of that RTP pipe. And there are several reasons why we decided not to use the LOGMODE table method to do this. The first reason is because if you're doing a path switch, you could have 100 sessions on that pipe. And each of those sessions could involve a different secondary LU. And each secondary LU could have a different mode table. So the question would become, which mode table do you use to resolve the LOGMODE name to a class of service? The second reason is that once the RTP pipe is set up, it's not clear to me that we even have the LOGMODE name anymore. We know what APPN class of service is being used. We do not always know what the original LOGMODE names were in those cases. So instead, we decided, well, if we always have an APPN class of service name, because the RTP pipe is associated with an APPN class of service, then why don't we just use the APPN to subarea cost mapping table method to pick the subarea virtual route? And that's basically what we decided to do. So whenever we're doing HPR across the subarea virtual route, we use the APPN to subarea cost mapping table method to pick the subarea class of service for the virtual route. What happens if you don't have an APPN to subarea class of service table, mapping table? We have no choice but use the only standard subarea cost name that we know about. And the only standard subarea cost name is IST-VT-COS, which is the one that's used for your CP-CP sessions and your SSCP to SSCP sessions. So it's network priority. And what this means is that every session over that virtual route that's using HPR would be flowing at network priority. It means LU sessions can now hold up APPN locate flows. You definitely don't want that to occur. I actually had a customer try this, flip on the HPR capability on their VRTGs, and their VR0 or their TP0 basically went to a grinding halt, and it was because everything was flowing at TP0 and so nothing was really getting through to speak of. So this is the only time when it's required. If you're not doing HPR across virtual routes, I recommend that you stay away from the APPN to subarea and subarea APPN class of service mapping tables completely. Finally, I got a couple of debug aids. I told you that if sessions set up, they still may not be setting up the way you want them to, so you have to make sure that you're actually looking for the results. If you do a display of an application, he'll display everything about the application, for example, but he'll also show you what mode tab you're using. If you ever see mode tab equals not applicable, unless you've chosen the route that uses IST-INCLM for everything, this should be an eye catcher that says I don't have something set up correctly. The same might be true for this LOGMODE operand, right? But more importantly, what you're trying to actually pick up is the session ID. You can actually do this to pick up a session ID, or you can do a DNet sessions list equals all and pick up a session ID. Not clear to me that either of these are good for applications, for example, that have thousands of sessions because they roll off the screen. But you really wanted to issue a command that allows you to pick up that session ID. And then when you do a DNet sessions with session ID equals, you can actually get details about the session. It'll tell you what LOGMODE name was chosen. It'll tell you what subarea class of service name was chosen. It tells you what APPN class of service name was chosen. It also gives you an indication sometimes that says LOGMODE YODA mode was unknown in this domain, and so we use the IST-COS-DF entry instead. That would be a reason why we're always picking pound connect, for example. Notice this message here says APPN class of service in the slew direction is pound connect. which implies that you might also have an APPN class of service in the blue direction. And it also implies that you might actually have a different APPN class of service in both directions. The case where that might occur is if you have back-to-back RTP pipes at a border node. It's possible that you did cost mapping in between them, and so the APPN class of service in one network is not the same as the APPN class of service in the other network. And in that case, we would actually display them both for you. So here's a way for you to verify that the correct log mode, subarea COS, and APPN COS are being used for the session to make sure that they're coming up the way that you expect them to. That's the end of this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it.